Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining me for yet another episode of Ms.Dr.Kenya. We are now in the month of September. Most of our children went back in August. So last month, we spent the time talking to Lawana R. Wilson, specifically about helping our children who graduated from college last year. How do we help them transition into adulthood? I was sharing with Lawana in last month's podcast that one of the members of the youth council verbalized a very real fear in reference to what do I do next now that high school is over? What's the next step for me? But at this particular point in the year, our school-age children, K through 12, have returned to school. The initial excitement of going back to school has kind of waned a little bit, right? We've run out of all of our fresh new clothes and outfits. And now we're back to our routine. And some of our babies may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. They may be feeling overwhelmed academically, having struggles with their reading, their writing. Some may be struggling with math and arithmetics. And so it only makes sense that I bring to you some experts in both fields. I have with me today two incredible other African-American female entrepreneurs who are using their talent and skills to make sure that our children are well and holistically well. And so I am going to pivot to them, introduce them to you, and allow them to share with you what it is that they want to share from their heart. So I'm going to start and go in alphabetical order, right? That's the only fair thing to do. And I am going to start with Miss Amie Archbold. Hi, Amie. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I am a first grade teacher currently, but I have been a lower elementary teacher for about 13 years now, and reading is my passion. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about. I have a virtual tutoring business that I help kids to learn how to read virtually. So that's something that I'm really into right now.
Thank you for that, Amie. And also with us is Miss Jaliyla Fraser. Jaliyla, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you for having me. So excited to be here. And just like Amie, passionate about education. I consider myself a dope math educator, and we support educators and families to help students feel competent in mathematics. So excited to be here to share some tools, tips, resources that can help all students.
Well, ladies, I'm certainly excited about both of your skills and passions because I understand how struggling academically can really, really impact a child social emotionally. And that's what I do, right? As a former school-based social worker, excuse me, it was my job to support the children as far as their mental well-being. But I want to hear from you guys, right? The actual educators who are working with children, working with family hands-on. What are some of the struggles that you have seen as it relates to your different areas of expertise? And either one of you can answer.
I can go ahead and start. So the struggles that I have seen is that parents just simply do not know where to start when their child does not know how to read. They sometimes think that they will just grow into the knowledge, or that they just need a little more time in school, and that they're kind of helpless when it comes to knowing what to do to actually help their child learn how to read. And they're also not aware of the resources that are available to them. So that's the main struggle that I see, is that they either think that, oh, they'll eventually get it, or I'm not equipped to teach my child, so I'll just let the teacher handle it. Or that they don't know resources that are available to them to either bring into the home or to seek out, and either, whether it's virtual or in an actual brick and mortar location, but they're not aware of how to even begin in that area.
I would agree that parents don't know. Parents don't know. Jaliyla, what have you seen?
I would say, in addition to that, I like to break it up into one, they don't know, and they just don't feel comfortable with the subject. And then the other thing is just about like the mindset. to believe that they can help their child figure it out. So I know it's, like the mindset for me is the first thing that we try to tackle. And if we don't have the mindset of like what patience looks like for families to be able to help their kids read and or learn mathematics at high levels, what strategies are we like how are we rearranging our schedule so that we're more intentional with this particular task? Because once they like don't get to that, I want to say benchmark level of reading and or learning mathematics, it's only going to like exponentially decline as the students get older. So, there's a crucial point in time in the beginning when we really have to make sure that the families know that their job is just as instrumental as the educators.
Yeah, you make and bring up a good point. Both of you kind of shared some of the same points. I am curious from, my role as social worker and doctor of clinical psychology, I wonder if that weighting is a result of the discrepancy model. We don't normally at this particular point rely heavily on the discrepancy model. We are also able to do things called response to intervention or MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. But there was a point in time when we relied heavily on the discrepancy model. And what the discrepancy model said was ultimately that the school would not provide additional supports at the level of specialized instruction unless your child was at least 3 years behind. And I think that somewhere along the lines, it became programmed within our minds that, the school won't help at this particular point, or they have to be significantly behind for it to really be a thing. But we have now pivoted from that. As you learn, you grow, you get more information. And as you get more information, you incorporate that information to how you show up in the now. So now we know that it really is dangerous, to both your points, for us to wait for our children to get 3 years behind. And schools are showing up, and they're showing up early. What does that look like in your respective locations? Because we have educators from all over the United States. Amie is from Florida, and Jaliyla is calling in from the Jersey area. So we have educators from different parts of the nation. And from you all's perspective, what does that look like when schools intervene early?
Yeah, so what we do is we do early assessments and we kind of get the benchmark level of where they're starting at to have a better understanding of where they're going in the future. You can typically see concerns early on, and those gaps are only going to grow. As you mentioned, when you get to the 2 and 3 year below grade level, it only becomes that much harder to close those gaps and see those gains. Not only that, but you're going to start seeing some self-confidence diminish. You're going to see the willpower and the motivation to try to close those gaps. They're going to close not only in the child, but the parent is going to become fatigued trying to close those gaps and use the resources and things as well. So what we have found is that early intervention is key because those gaps are not so overwhelming and they are more manageable when you take the time to figure them out before they get to be something that's going to be detrimental to their school career. So early assessments that are done in small chunks that are targeted are going to help us to steer that child in the right direction, providing them with the right resources and tools and skills. Maybe they are amazing in one skill set that may appear to be advanced, but in those lower skills, they just missed it or they didn't grasp that concept. It may not be an issue now, but in the future, it's going to be a problem because all learning is scaffolded upon each other. So when you start having a breakdown of the foundation, like I said, you might not feel the shake in the beginning, but as you progress throughout the school year or, different grade levels, you are definitely going to feel that you're not as secure in your knowledge foundation. And it's just going to start to crumble like, anything with a weak foundation would. So, for example, I just finished up parent night, and one of the parents actually mentioned to me that their child was bored in the kindergarten class. They knew all the information. They were able to read. They had great handwriting and all the things. But when I did my early assessment, this reader that could read on a third grade level in first grade did not know vowel sounds.
Mhm.
So if you think about that, that is a huge issue, because as we get to harder words and we have, blends and vowel teams and digraphs and quadgraphs and trigraphs and all these things, and they don't know the very minimal foundation of phonics, the vowel sounds, that's a problem. And if I didn't catch that early, and we're, thankfully we're not into September yet, but if I had not caught that early, that could have been a huge issue later on. So it's very key. Even the kids that you think are on target, it's really great to do some assessing just to see where those holes are, just to see where those gaps are. And, it's the same for math. I do math in first grade as well. So I know that she can speak on the math piece, but it's very similar with that foundational piece.
I have a follow-up question to that, because one thing that I share with parents is not to fall in love with grades and to do a deeper dive when they are looking at those assessments that they get from schools, right? So, and more often than not, when you get the assessments that are done, especially the assessments that are done periodically, there's like a bar graph. And so as a parent, I'm just checking to see if my child is within that bar graph. But what I don't do is take a deeper dive to see, has my child progressed from last assessment cycle to this assessment cycle? And though my scholar may be excellent in reading generally, there are lots of skill sets that follow under, that whole idea of reading. How are they in the actual skills that go into reading, so that as things get harder and life gets harder, that we know what they are and we can lean into them. So ultimately, what I heard you say is that this particular parent may be guilty of that. I don't know. But oftentimes as parents, if our child is able to read a book to us, if our child is doing well with his or her grades, their grades, then we just assume generally that they're doing well, that they have all the skills that they need, and we don't take a deeper dive.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that? Like you just shared some of them.
Well,
Go ahead.
children are experts at compensating.
Mm.
They will use any and everything in the classroom, what they've seen on a cartoon show, what they heard a parent say, what they see on the whiteboard, what they see on the smartboard, to try to cover the gaps that they have. So for example, if a child is aware that they struggle in class, and that maybe they don't know how to spell certain words, they're going to pay close attention to when the teacher goes around the room and says, this is the word this is the word red, this is the word green. So when I say, write a sentence that says, I see the green and red cat, they're going to say, I see, there's the word the, green and red cat. So then when you walk around, you're like, oh my gosh, they knew how to spell everything perfectly. No, they were compensating. They have been holding on to that information to use so that they don't appear to be behind. They don't do it intentionally, obviously, to like trick the teacher. They're just trying to survive in the classroom, and they're going to do that any way that they can see fit. Nobody wants to be called out. Nobody wants to seem like they don't know what's going on. So they find a way to patchwork their knowledge together in a way that works for them. And if you're not careful, if you're not doing assessments, you can miss those gaps. And I'm almost certain that's probably how that happened, that on paper, looks great. But when you take those supports away, like the posters on the wall or the letter sounds and things like that, that's when you start to see the foundation crumble because they don't have those supports to compensate with.
I love that. Children are excellent at compensation. That's very true. We see it often. I've never heard it explained that way, but I would agree with that. Jaliyla, I'm just curious, how are the children showing up in Jersey?
So just want to give you some context with where my expertise is. So I was a high school math and physics teacher as well as a professor in college. And so early literacy, early mathematics is something that I never taught, but I did supervise. And so what I hear or heard from the teachers that I did supervise is that when they're in that K-2 phase, when we talk about those, topics that they're supposed to be able to have with procedural fluency, for example, counting or knowing how many objects are in a set and things like that, those basic foundational pieces, they're not, I want to say, accessing that bank as much as they should and as much as they can for various reasons. One of them being, if we were to talk about the lens of educators, mathematics has always been a mystifying thing, and some people feel like they either know it or they don't. They
Mm,
feel like they're a math person or they're not. So if we were to talk about educators that do teach in early childhood, right, and they don't feel comfortable with a certain math topic per
mm.
se, then you're not going to get that student or that teacher to really dig deep and see how they can use different ways of representations to make sure that the student understand, because they probably don't feel as comfortable with the topic either, right? And so those things are happening at that grade level, especially K-5, is when uh our subjects aren't departmentalized as much.
Yeah.
So if a teacher didn't go to school for mathematics or has some concentration in it, then those students are left with educators that either like it or don't like it as much. And they may breeze over fractions because fractions are, again, one of those topics. So that's what I see in that particular piece. But also want to step back because I'm not sure how the nation is when it comes to just early learning centers, right? The pre-K or even prior to K, ages 3, 4, 5. In New Jersey, I want to say they're not as connected to the public schools as much as I would think they should be. So in terms of like progression, the early learning centers are just that dependent of the K-5. And so what standards look like, what students are supposed to really understand and know by the time they hit kindergarten, it may be just, it may not be the same across all early learning centers. So you're going to see kids coming in at all different levels, pouring into one school. So that's what I see in New Jersey. Even the curriculum is different. The expectations are different. And so we don't really have that bridge or that conversation with the early learning centers and what, we do want the students to already have mastered when they enter kindergarten.
Yeah, but as a former high school mathematics teacher and someone who not only educated the educators, right, like supervised the educators, you're actually working with families right now. So you have a perspective, a unique perspective that is specific to the impact of not getting those foundational skills and not having a bridge between the early learning centers and the actual K-12 schools, and what it looks like and how it impacts young people in high school, right? So as they come to the end of their K-12 career, how it impacts educators and how it may impact how they show up in the classroom. And right now you're sitting with how it impacts families. So from those different lenses, can you tell us what you have seen and are seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, from families, again, right, when it comes to parents and them believing that they can help your child with mathematics, it's non-existent. And so again, we're working with mindsets like you can do it, but we're also showing them how to use manipulatives with your children, how to turn the question around and, you know, use those question techniques so that the students can show them what to do, how they can have patience and talk about stress and anxiety because those things are real when you're sitting at the dinner table. I mean, I always go back to, you know, Johnny had 5 apples, like that's a real thing, you
Yeah.
know. And parents get so overwhelmed. Some of them may do the homework for them. But then the other thing that I know is important, that's why we started doing the parent workshops with school districts, is because access to language is also a barrier. And so a lot of our families, they are Portuguese speaking, Spanish speaking, Haitian Creole. And they, at that point, so one, math is hard, right? Period, for people. Or that's what they believe. And then to layer it, the parent doesn't even understand the language that's coming across the page, they will never be able to support their children. And so what we make sure that we do is offer translators that come to every workshop. And so if the school district says, hey, we have a high population of Haitian Creole and Spanish, then we are having those translators with us and they learn the math as well. They get accustomed to the workshops that we do so that as we're walking around and we're playing with manipulatives and cues and their rods and, you know, counters and things like that, they can also translate the text for the parent and in the workshop handouts and so forth. But what I definitely see from a, you know, K2 grades 3, 5 level is that parents do not feel like they can understand mathematics, so that they're not helping their child learn math at early levels. They're not saying, hey, as we're driving in a car, how many numbers do you see on a license plate? How many different combinations can you make? When we're going to the grocery store, they're not quizzing their child on the change that they should receive if they gave a $20 bill. Like, I know we do a lot of things automatic now with debit cards and so forth, but that doesn't mean that we can't create a context for our children so that they can actually start doing mathematics in the real world. You know, are we filling up a jar with marbles and seeing, can your child estimate the number of marbles in a jar and then explain why they think so, right? Like, what are we doing just outside of like the normal classroom? They don't know that they can do that. They don't know that that's mathematics, and they don't know that that's just creating those synapses in the student, in their child's brain, so that they can absorb more and more. So that's what I'm seeing, just the confidence to believe that they can create mathematical context within their homes, within their, you know, everyday lives, and getting their child excited about it. The last thing is like messaging, right? So imagine a parent or a child coming up to their mom and they're like, or their dad, and say, hey dad, I really don't understand this topic. And the mom says something like, well, listen, I ain't understand that either when I was, you know, like, just although it's her truth, right? That is something that is recycled in the kid's brain. And so they kind of learn like helplessness in that way, and learn like it's okay to opt out. And the parent doesn't even realize that they're doing that, but they're giving that child the ability to say, well, my mom didn't get it. You know what I mean? Like those are the pieces that we don't realize. It's so subliminal. It's like it's not even there, but it's happening, and your brain is picking up on that. So we try to educate, you know, their parents on like the language that they should use around their kids.
Thank you. You brought up some very insightful points. The one thing that I really appreciate is the emphasis on the connection between reading and math, right? Like, in order to do mathematics equations, you have to have language, number one. You have to be able to read, because most math problems, especially as you begin to get up in the higher grades, are kind of hidden in a word problem. So if you don't have access to, if you don't know how to read, right, then you're going to have a hard time even figuring out that mathematics problem. But luckily, Amy, tell us about your answer to that particular conundrum.
Reading is unique in the way that it touches virtually all subject areas. So regardless if it's math, history, science, social studies, all of those require reading in order to obtain the information for the most part. Sometimes math is just numbers, but there are word problems. So when parents can understand the impact that it touches on, sometimes they pay a little bit more attention to it, instead of like, oh, they'll get it down the road, or oh, it'll come to them, or like she was mentioning, oh, I didn't get it when I was younger either. That's a huge issue as well, because they're hearing their parents say that, and like she mentioned, then it kind of gives them the pass to say, well, it's just how I'm built. My mind, my brain isn't going to do this. And that's a limiting belief right there that's going to shut it down. And so we really want the growth mindset to be in place, where they're realizing that maybe I don't know something now, but I can unlock it in the future. And that's kind of how I explain it to parents, is that if I was to lock a door and then I asked you to open that door without giving you the key that went to that door, you'd think that that was ridiculous. Like, how would you expect me to open the door without the key? Well, that's what we're doing when we're not focusing on reading to all those other subject areas, because reading is the key that's going to unlock the door to the majority of it. So even when you may not understand that lecture or lesson in class, you can go back in the textbook and read it for yourself and process that information in your own time, in your own way, more slowly or more quickly, however you see fit, if you're able to read that material. But if you take away that level of reading, you can't even do it on your own at home in your own space. So I think that when parents understand that how much it touches, and they see that that it creates a domino effect of problems, that this is something that they need to pay attention to, and that they can't have the excuse of, well, I wasn't able to do it when I was younger. That's no longer acceptable, because there's so many resources, there's so many opportunities for them to get that information, that we really have to change that narrative that of I can't, or becoming a victim of whatever was in the past, and just really teaching the parents that, with these tried and true tools, you can do better. The way that I try to help my parents is I record videos for them and I show them the steps, because there is nothing worse, I think, for a parent than to feel like you don't know how to explain to your first grader how to do the math. And I was just talking to the parents tonight at this open house that there's going to be a different process for completing these math problems and equations that you are not taught, that does not seem intuitive to the way that you learned, but it's the way that things are going now, and it's proven to work and be effective. So in order to not have them shut down and say, that's not how we did it, and that's really honestly probably their own either pride or embarrassment or shame that they don't understand it. So they kind of just shut down and say like, oh, that's not, the way that it should be done. So what I do to try to combat that is I just simply send a video and say, hey, your first grader may be a little bit confused on this particular problem. Let me show you how I teach it in class, so that when you are teaching it at home, we're using the same language and we're using the same process. So that does two things. One, it makes sure that I keep consistency with how the scholars and the children in my class are being taught. But two, it kind of gives a safe space for a parent that may not be strong in math or strong in whatever, a way to kind of scaffold their own gaps and see how they can come alongside their child. Maybe they don't know their vowel sounds because it's been so long ago that they don't know the difference between a short A sound and a short E sound. It happens. That's a very, very basic skill that they may have seen 20, 30 years ago. And so when you ask them, hey, what's a short I make? That's not at the forefront of their mind. And they may be embarrassed to say, I don't know. And that's a kindergarten, first grade skill. So what I do is I record a video. Hey, make sure that your scholar or your child is saying these vowel sounds correctly. That's keeping the consistency of the classroom, but it's also teaching the parent the right way so that they don't feel like they are not competent or that, they don't have the knowledge to empower their children. We have to kind of, in a delicate manner, give them the tools and the confidence themselves to continue the learning for their children.
Yeah, great
And
point.
can I jump in
Yep.
on that? Something you mentioned, Amy, about the parents knowing how to sound out vowel sounds this way, or knowing how to solve a math problem this way. And so right now the kids are learning a different strategy that is more in line with like what the standards are saying. And there's a part in there where I'm in full agreement, but then the other part, when we talk about honoring what each person brings to the table, honoring what the parent does know, and then leveraging that as a point of conversation to see how that child can use a different strategy. And so when we talk about mathematics and we talk about, students being able to anchor themselves and finding different approaches, multiple representations to look at that, I'm wondering if there's ways where we can, have the parent honor the fact that they do know it in this way. And maybe it's very algorithm based and we don't want them to get to that yet, right? We want them to build that conceptual understanding of that topic. And, I definitely understand that piece of it. But I think for me, it's important that the parents, for them to keep going, like, hey, show them this way as well. Like, instead of not allowing them to highlight their strategy as well. And I'm not sure if that's what you were saying, but
No. So typically it's when the parent doesn't have an idea at all. So
okay.
I started implementing that when a parent was like breaking down in tears, this is a trigger for me. I know that it's just first grade level math, but this was a struggle point for me. I don't even know where to start. And I was like, okay, there's no reason that a parent should be crying because they're so overwhelmed with how to teach their child how to do something because they don't even know where to start. Typically, the families that their parents are good in math, they're able to show, hey, do it this way, and you can do it this way that you learned in school. It's
Love
more
that.
so for the parents that don't have any idea or have those triggers. And it happens in reading too, where they say, I never really learned how to read well. I hated reading in front of, the class. And so, I stumble over my words when I read. So I don't do bedtime stories because I just get so self-conscious. I think that I sound dumb and it just brings me back to my classroom when I was in middle school, high school, or whatever. And so it's more so for the parents that don't have a starting base to even jump off of that are utilizing those videos that I send. The other parents, they look at them and they're just like, okay, yeah, but it's not really the like pillar that they're using to help their child. So I've seen kids come in and say, my dad showed me how to do it this way. And I'm like, oh yeah, cool, awesome. But that doesn't work for everyone because some of the kids that I see, because I'm working with kids that are so young, they have to do A, B, C in that order and that pattern. It scaffolds on itself, and then later, once they have that number sense or they have those phonics skills down, then they can venture out and kind of be a little more creative with how they express that. But yeah, I usually do that. I do send it to the whole class, but I find it's the parents that have those triggers or have been really self-conscious about their skills that utilize those types of things. And it's in a safe space that nobody knows that they needed that, or, so it's just a way to kind of bridge the gap and help them to feel like they're successful when they're helping their kid.
That sounds great.
So Jaliyla, I appreciate you because we do focus on more so, especially from the school perspective of creating a safe and supportive environment for children. But I love how you are advocating that safe and supporting environment also extends to family. I appreciate you for that particular lens. Can you tell us more about, I have two questions. One is for you, one is for Amy. Can you tell us more about your program, right? a dope math book and how you go about supporting families in need. And then, Amy, I also want to pivot to you once Jaliyla finishes sharing. And I want to ask you to share more about a conversation we've had off camera in reference to schools going from sight words, which was popular when my daughter was in school, and heading more towards phonics again. So I have a question to both of you about your respective programs. But Jaliyla, I want to start with you.
Absolutely. So the name of my company is Fraser Math Solutions, and we are heavy on the solutions because we advocate for all stakeholders when it comes to education and their child learning mathematics. So when we talk about stakeholders, we think about everyone that has direct access to students or even indirect access, and then what are the gaps that they're missing that they need. And so that comes in the form of professional development for their educators, not just the math teachers, but it comes for their math coaches, as well as the principals, as well as the, again, families and even the substitutes. Then when we talk about how do we bring like math joy into those spaces, then that's coming with our dope math notebook. That's coming with our student-facing programs, and it's all under the Dope Math Institute. So we'll do a dope math tour and show students how to use the dope math notebooks. The notebooks are literally notebooks on steroids. It's not a curriculum that a teacher, the school has to replace, right? It is a notebook with blank paper, graph paper, line paper, but within the different sections of the notebook, there are math tips that are grade appropriate and that are aligned to the common, the standards rather. And then there are cool math facts in there to help students like just have some curiosity around mathematics. And then it's all translated in Spanish. So one side has English, the other side has Spanish. In the beginning, we teach them how to use the notebook. So there's a whole introduction about why we created the notebook simply for them. And then all the way to the back of the notebook, it's a reference sheet that's grade appropriate. So if you're in third grade, you have a reference sheets that show you different parts of a fraction. But if you're in Algebra 1, we provide you with definitions and things like that when it comes to exponential equations and graphs and things like that. And so every student from grades 3 through Algebra 1 has the ability to access this notebook when they're doing their homework, but then it doubles as a accompaniment for parents. So when they're at home at the dinner table, hey, pull out your notebook, pull out your math notebook. Like it's literally specifically for both stakeholders so that, you know, the student can feel supported. We give questions in there that they can ask. So it's not a workbook with exercises. No, this is where you do your homework, but it has so many resources and tips in there that can help them continue with, you know, their homework. And so, I mean, what we do is, to be honest, whatever we want to do in this company, and where we see a gap, we kind of create a solution for that. I'm excited right now because we essentially settled on all of our programs. And so we're not really adding anything new. We're just making everything that we have better and, you know, just trying to be sustainable. But everything for us is comprehensive, like wrap around. How do we ensure that if I'm working with the principal, then what am I doing with the teachers, right? And how do those two stakeholders invest and impact with student learning? So that's what we do at FMS, and excited about the company that I've created, and it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too, but I am curious that what led you to lead to create the notebook? Like what problem were you seeing and what problem were you addressing when you created the notebook?
So definitely what we saw was by the 8th grade, students of color, students, like female students, they just didn't feel, I don't want to say excited, they didn't feel confident in mathematics. And so again, they would opt out.
Yeah.
We saw that families didn't know how to help their children at home with mathematics. We saw a decline in people that are pursuing STEM careers. We just saw an overall crisis like nationwide, and especially during the pandemic, because we released the notebook in 2021 off of the heels of the pandemic. And parents became honorary teachers. Like, I'm sure a lot of them got their teaching certificate just because they were at home and they're realizing the job that educators have to do, but they
Yeah.
didn't have anything tangible to, like support that. So we just, went along with dope math because that's how I feel. I feel like I'm a dope math educator. Trademarked that bad boy and created this. The first notebook we created was just about mindset. So that's what you see in my background. And it was just about helping everyone with their mathematical mindset. So the tips in there has nothing to do with like math problems, but everything to do with showing up boldly in mathematics and what you should do if you're feeling this way, or, why should you show your work and so forth. And then when we realized that was a hit, we said, I think we need to really focus on individual notebooks for our grade level. So last year we debuted the 8 notebooks, our new product line, and just so excited we were able to donate, got private donors to donate notebooks to 2 book bag drive giveaways, and students were just like going crazy over their notebooks. And it's just a beautiful sight to see that students get excited about mathematics. Like that was the last problem. Because when I'm in those rooms, right, making decisions with mathematics, and again, I was supervisor of math for about 10 years in the school district, and a lot of decisions I had to make in various capacities. And I would always hear people ask me, well, how do you get them excited about math? How do we get them excited about math? And that was always a question. And I set out to literally solve that. This is how you get them excited. Give them something cool to write with, give them something dope that, is wrapped in a sleek design, all those different things. Like, we really over designed it for the different stakeholders. And even for teachers, they love it because it's like a dream. They don't want to find graph paper because the child, don't have the graph paper. Like, we really try to design it with a lot of different people in mind. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And Amie, tell me a little bit about your program that you've started.
Yeah, so my business is Revival in Learning, Hope Restored. So the goal is to help parents that have kind of lost hope for helping their child to read if they've maybe been told that, they're just not going to get it, or it's just not working, or they get frustrated, or, they don't know where else to turn. That's where I step in. And I start with parent education. I offer free parent webinars that really take a quick overview of just phonics in general. And like you were mentioning, right now we are kind of pivoting in the teaching community towards the science of reading, and we're getting away from the traditional methods of memorization. And that is just the difference between balanced literacy, which is memorizing those sight words and kind of doing that whole language perspective, and now shifting gears to a more phonics-based or structured literacy, where you kind of focus on a routine. So the best way that I can explain it is that the old method just encourage parents to just read to your children, every night, and magically they're going to pick up on phonics skills and they're just going to learn how to read. So, parents would kind of be chastised for not reading to their kid at night if the teacher found that the child wasn't reading. So like, well, are you reading books to them at night? And, parents would either say yes or no. So if you said yes, then, you need to read more because you're not reading enough, and that's why they're not reading. Or if you said no, then, well, you're not reading books, so that's why they're not reading. And that's not true at all. What they've actually found scientifically is that in order for a child to learn, you have to be structured and intentional with what you are actually teaching them. And it kind of goes back to that compensation, where when you are memorizing sight words, you're using your working memory, and you can only store and hold so much in your mind and in your brain when you're doing that. And at a certain point, it works really well, because when you're in kindergarten and first grade, it's not too much that you have to hold in there, and you can kind of make do with your working memory until you move on and you get to more complex phonetic skills where your brain just can't keep up with it anymore. So what they found is that they need to stop with the memorization and move into structured, explicit teaching of the phonic sound. So for example, if you wanted to learn Chinese, and I said, okay, I'm going to teach you Chinese every night, 7 o'clock, I'm going to read for an hour. I'm just going to read to you. It's going to be perfect pronunciation. It's going to be high level vocabulary and all these things. I'm just going to read to you for a year, 7 o'clock at night. Do you think that you'd be able to learn Chinese fluently in that manner from just being read to? Probably not. You certainly would not be able to write it from just, listening to someone read to you in Chinese. You would need explicit instruction on the sound that is made with these symbols in order to put them together, in order to find context and meaning, to understand what you're reading. So just simply hearing the words over and over again is not going to do anything for you. And that's what we're doing with sight words. We're just shoving up a word and saying, memorize it, know it, know it, know it. It doesn't translate when you take it out of the context of maybe a story that they've been reading. When they see, I see the cat, I see the dog, I see the bear. Great, looks and sounds like they're reading. If you were to take that exact sentence and flip those words around, they may not be able to read that to you because they have used their memory to memorize the story. So that's what we have moved away from. We're finding phonics is the way to go. So that's what I focus on. I have free parent webinars where I teach the parents some basic phonics skills that they can implement right away with children that are, preschool, if they're a little bit advanced, all the way up to second. And sometimes I don't even like to say grade levels because it's really where your child is. So you could have a fourth grader that is on a kindergarten or first grade level. So you really need to think about the phonics skills that they have versus the grade level that they're in. So I have what is called Foundations, and that is a virtual course. It's very small, short, mini bursts of information, starting with the foundation of letter sounds and then going into vowels. And you may think that, you could have a second or third grader that doesn't need the letter sounds, but oftentimes these children are adding additional sounds to letters. For example, the letter T. If you say, what sound does a T make? They're saying T, which would actually be the letters T and U. What my program does is it goes back, cleans up those letter sounds, it cleans up the vowel sounds, and it starts at the very, very beginning so that we are catching any gaps that they have before progressing to the next level. So I have Foundations, which is just 6 little mini videos that are going to make sure that they have the basic phonemic awareness that they need. Then I go into level 1, which scaffolds on top of that, level 2 and level 3, which ends at about a second to third grade level. I have not put level or grade levels on there because, like I said, you could have a fourth grader that is on a kindergarten, first or second grade reading level. So you really want to focus on those key skills in phonics. But what I do is I just restore the hope that you can learn to read. And we have little short bursts of success when you start with little nuggets like vowel sounds that then lead to 2-letter blends that lead to 3-letter blends. And then you have, complex text that they're reading. They get those small little wins that show them that they can. And then they're willing and they have the motivation to do harder things because they can see how it's broken apart and how words work. And it's really amazing to see. And even as little as kindergarten, because that's where I started doing this phonics. And actually, it was actually preschool. I actually started when they were 4 years old. And I've just seen that phonics is the way to go when it comes to teaching to read, because instead of memorizing a specific word in a specific context, you memorize specific sounds that can be applied to any text that you read.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for that. I've heard you both talk about the impact of motivation and confidence and self-esteem and all of these different topics and concepts that will be more consistent with somebody that has like an emphasis on social emotional learning, one would think, or mental health. But the truth of the matter is, people don't divorce one part of themselves to do something else. So I cannot divorce myself of my social emotional self, of my spiritual self. When I tap into my cognitive self, I bring all of me to the table. So as educators, when you are working with children, they bring all of themselves to the table. And it's important to have a whole child approach, especially when you understand how all of these things are interconnected and how they impact learning. From your perspective, what does a whole child approach looks like as an educator? I don't know if the approach looks differently based upon what you teach? Like, is there a difference in how you would approach a whole child approach as, let's say, a reading teacher or a math teacher? Is it a difference in how you would approach the whole person perspective based upon your own self personality? Or does your school kind of just have just some standard expectations that they expect? So from your perspectives, what does that look like for you? How do you see it in your classroom? How do you make sure that your children and your families, your educators, are feeling good holistically?
So when it comes to the children, the scholars in my classroom, they you can't really move the needle ahead if they don't have the motivation to do so, because you can only explain something so many times, but you cannot create or force the will to use that information and apply it to get some ground on their learning. So you really have to find a way early on to get those quick wins, to get the success going, to get the belief that they can instilled in them, so they start believing in themselves again. Because once they've lost hope in themselves, there's not much that you can do to get that back. So it really starts with the intrinsic motivation that they have. And sometimes you will see a pattern in the family that it starts at home, that they don't have the self-awareness to kind of pick themselves up by the bootstraps. And sometimes you kind of have to teach those types of skills. And what I have found is you kind of trick them into seeing that they can. So for example, it's really heartbreaking when you have a 5 or 6-year-old saying, "I'm too dumb to read." Not because they've heard a parent or anyone say that. That's truly how they feel in that moment, just like anybody would if they were expected to complete an assignment and they just don't know how to do and they don't have the tools. So when a child says, "I'm just too dumb to read," I try to start at the lowest skill that they do have. And once I have figured that out, let's say it's letter sounds. If they have their letter sounds down, then I can have them say the letter T. So they just go T. I'm like, okay, great. Now, what about the letter P? What sound does that make? So they do that and they're like, oh, this is easy. So I want them to kind of be at that state where like, this is easy, I can do this. And just showing a lot of excitement and just like, wow, that's amazing. It's really great. Okay, what about a short vowel O? What does that make? And so they will say it. So then you kind of trick them like, okay, so if this says T and this says ah, if I put them together, what would that be? And they're like, ta. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So if this is ta, what sound did this make again? So what if I put that together, what happens? Will it be top? I'm like, oh, you just read that. And then when you kind of distract them from realizing that we're here to read, you kind of start with what they know and then you build on that. So then once they have read that word, they can't tell me they can't read anymore because they just did and they proved it to themselves when they didn't even know that they could. So in that sense, it is on us to kind of get that motivation going, but you kind of have to find a little bit of a sneaky way to get it in there sometimes, because sometimes they're so low with their self-esteem that they don't even want to try. So you got to start where they're at and get that motivation going. And I've always found that once they read that first word, just top, then they're like, oh, I can do this. And you start scaffolding from there. And that's pretty much how my course is built out, so that it kind of slowly, snowballs into them reading before they even realize it. So I think that it's just those little tiny bite-sized pieces, starting where they have their success, and getting them to feel it on their own versus forcing that motivation on them, because you just can't do that.
Yeah. So Jaliyla, from your perspective, what does a whole person approach look like?
So for me, like, it's baked in. I let the mathematics be the vehicle and part of the facilitation of ensuring that we tap into the full child. It's like baked into it, right? So what I What do I mean by that? If we're talking about teaching a class and the first thing is the do now, we call it our spark. And what we do is ensure that the task itself is so rich but accessible that the child, whoever the child is, can find a way to enter that problem. And so when we see every child attempting it, and when I say enter the problem, they don't have to solve it, but they have to be able to feel like, oh, this is within my zone. Like I can do something. I don't feel defeated, right? Then out of that part, like they're creating their own intrinsic motivation because they feel some type of success. And then on the back end, we come in, and when I say we, I mean my illuminators, my team, that's what we call all of our facilitators. We come in on the back end and just kind of stamp that for them and congratulate them in wherever they are on the problem, right? Whether they're starting, oh, wow, oh, look at you started that. Like, we're being very like mindful about how we speak to them, how we provide that positive engagement. And then you see that incrementally show up as the day goes on. Like they're feeling like they can take risk to doing more things because one, they trust you, right? And those things, while I'm not an expert when it comes to like what SEL looks like and what is the structure and all that, but I know that kids have 5 survival needs, right? Fed, they need to be clothed, all that things, and then above all, they need to be loved, right? And so that SEO component is me showing up, our team showing up and saying like, we love you this much that we are going to make you feel good about any attempt that you make and then stretch your mind even further. So I think again, it starts with the task, right? Is the task accessible enough, but is it also rich enough that it can spiral, and get students to a higher level of thinking, so that they can, feel success. And that's how we do it. We do that with all of our stakeholders. Last week I did a professional development workshop for a school, and their admin team did not, like, one of the assistant principals, they will be over mathematics this year. And so there's a lot of like, them being tense and how do I get feedback? I don't even know the math, and which I understand, right? And so we make sure that we do that as well. Like, no, you don't have to know the math to give feedback. You just have to know what rich conversation looks like. You have to know what rich mathematics look like. You have to know when the teacher's leading the student versus the teacher is really creating an environment that's safe. Like those are the things that you can definitely give feedback, and then you're going to learn some math with us as you work with FMS, because you're going to feel encouraged to do more mathematics just by being in that professional development workshop. So SEO for me is making sure that it's baked in and we're not just talking about do this math, but believing that we can do the math.
Yeah, it's the same with reading. It's so cool to see how that kind of just transitions into all the subject areas, and it's the same method of just starting where they're at and just letting them see that they can do it even at the most basic level.
So Jaliyla, I absolutely love your reference to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Every time when I am in front of an audience, I pivot to Maslow's hierarchy of needs myself, because I feel like in its simplest form, right? Like you understand it from an experiential point. You understand that in order for you to be your best self, that there's just some basic things that you need. And so I always pivot to Maslow. Wrote a couple of articles on it, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But thank you for speaking my love language. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm learning, like, as I get in these spaces, I don't know how to reference the work, but I understand how to pull from it and make everything just more beneficial and engaging for students. And that's all we can do. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Like you said, you don't have to know it. You just need to understand what rich and purposeful conversation looks like. And at the end of the day, that's being able to read the cues and understand what does a person need from you in that particular moment, even if you don't know the theory. So I want us to spend this last moment that we have together pivoting back, right, to our initial start of the conversation. And that is, What words of advice do you have for parents? Even perhaps an educator that has gotten an assignment that they don't feel up to task for. What is your word of advice about getting them excited about your particular subject? What's your advice for them to get excited about math, teaching their young person math, teaching their young person reading? And what advice do you have for the handful of students who watch Ms.Dr.Kenya as well? How do we get excited again about these things?
I just say, as far as reading is concerned, like I said, with the science of reading, they have found that there is a strategic and systematic way to learn how to read. So the guessing, the memorization, that is no longer. So you can start as, basic as you want to, like with letter sounds, and you just scaffold and build on top of that. And before you know it, with very few phonics sounds memorized, you will unlock a lot of new words. And it will just continue to build on itself. So I would encourage parents to reach out if they don't feel like they are equipped or have the knowledge, reach out to sources that do. Don't be afraid to learn new things. Don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort zone. It takes practice, and it's something that you can achieve. And like I said, it's systematic. There's phonics rules that can be followed and applied and stay consistent within words. Of course, there are always exceptions, but for the most part, a lot of the sounds that are in these words, they can be broken apart. If you just have the key to unlock them, you can be successful. So your job is not to know everything. You're not expected to unlock doors that you don't have keys for. So your job is just to collect keys. So if you don't have a key for a particular word, try to break that word apart and see what keys you're missing. Learn those keys, apply it to that locked door, move on to the next door. And when you do that, you will see that you will be learning to read faster than you know it. You'll be able to apply it to so many things, and practice makes perfect. So just keep working at it. Don't lose hope. Keep that grit, keep pushing, and you will find success if you just don't give up.
Thank you, Amy. How about you, Jaliyla?
I love that. I would say, so I want to look at it from two different approaches, right? One approach being very like systemic or systematic within school districts. A lot of the time, school systems have parent nights, they'll have family nights, and some of them are very engaging, yet others are like, hey, here's the textbook your child is using. Let's go through the textbook. This is what it looks like, right? It's very just surface level. And so I would say the parent should advocate for more engaging family nights where it's not just like your typical STEM day where they just learn how to build things, because that's great as well. But how are teachers, or rather, how are parents actually learning how to teach your child how to read? How are they actually teaching their child how to learn mathematics? They should advocate for parent nights that look like that resemble like the real the concepts, right? If it's a monthly parent university, what are the topics that they're learning this month? And how do we preload that information for parents? So I think one, parents need to advocate for better family engagement nights, because school systems are required to have it. They're required to engage that stakeholder, right? But how they engage those stakeholders aren't really specified in the notes, right? So they kind of just do it for compliance. So advocate for better family parent nights. But on a, what can a parent do for themselves, right? To help themselves, I would absolutely say, watch what you say around your babies. Like, just watch your conversation, watch how you are, like, are you talking more negative or passively about the subject, or are you being more personal, like, hey, mommy wasn't good at this when I was growing up, but let's see how we can work on it together. Just like what Amy said, that growth mindset, and showing that you all are with it together. So just watching what you say around your children is very keen, but also realizing that we are in the age of technology and everything is at our fingertips. And the things that you don't know, I'm sure a little Google or ChatGPT. So it's, hey, where do I find resources to help my child learn how to add or subtract two-digit numbers? Like that is not something that, you know, you have to go to a library for anymore. It's at our fingertips. So there's a piece in there where we have to be accountable for our learning, and for us to get better. And it also shows your child that you're trying to learn something new. So, you know, just being able to do both, like advocating for better programs, but also learning that you can actually learn it on your own if you try it. So yeah.
And finally, ladies, is there anything that you want to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
I would just say that reading touches so many key parts of life, and you can really miss out on a lot. And that can even be like at the doctor's office when you're trying to read through legal documentation, or you're looking, you know, your child is 18 and they're looking for a new job and they're not able to understand the benefits that are offered to them. I mean, like you have to think long term where this is. Like right now, you know, no one's going to, you know, what they say, die from not learning how to read in first grade, second grade, even in, you know, middle school, high school. But when they get out into the real world and you're no longer there to support and guide and help and read for them, who's going to do it? You need to start now so that when they are out on their own, they are able to function in society. And reading is one of the things that touches every aspect of life, whether that's street signs, cooking, making purchases, putting together furniture, you know, like I said, job applications, closing on a home. I mean, anything you think of, getting a driver's license, you have to be able to read in order to obtain those types of things. And, you know, if you just start now when the phonics skills and the gaps are small, you're going to thank yourself in the future for the success that you see that your child obtains, because it touches science, it touches math, it touches, you know, everything. So focus on it. Don't let it go to the wayside. Oh, they'll get it next year. Oh, we'll learn, you know, worry about it later. Worry about it now. The time is now. Don't wait on it. If you're not equipped to help them, find someone who is. You know, like it was mentioned, quick Google, go to your school, go to a library, ask for resources. There is someone that is available to help you with those struggle points for you, but you just can't wait. That's the main thing I want to get across is do not wait. It's not going to fix itself. You have to be intentional and you have to be purposeful in how you're going to combat the issues you have, whether it's reading or math or whatever it is. You've got to be intentional.
Thank you. Jaliyla, how about you?
I'll keep it very brief, I would say. I think there's a lot of shame when it comes to people saying or not being able to read. There's a lot of shame around it. When it comes to mathematics, we hear people more being able to say, well, I don't know math and it's okay. And so there's not like a level of like, hey, the way how we kind of try to cover up not being able to read, like people go like, I don't know how to do, like they don't really say, I don't know how to read unless someone uncovers that, right? But when we talk about mathematics, we'll say to the mountaintop, I don't do that math. And why is it that it's okay for us to opt out or for us to say that so loud and proud when it's not the same with English? So I think for me, my last words would be, again, watching what we say, how we say it, and what we are accepting in our lives. Because just like Amy said about the particular, you know, reading, being able to own a home, you also need mathematics to comprehend whether or not you're getting a good deal on that home or not. So they all work hand in hand, and one is not greater than the other. One comes before the other, right? But they are both complementary in this world that we call life. So, you know, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and my takeaway would be get the help that you need. Get the help that you need. Ask the questions, Google it, speak with teachers, do whatever it is that you need to do. Go to coaching programs, get the Dope Math Notebook, right? Download the Kaleidoscope app. Do whatever you need to do to get help. There is truly no shame. It shouldn't be any shame in getting the help that you need. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining us for the September episode of Ms.Dr.Kenya. I hope that you learned something. I learned a lot of things. We will be sharing information out on how you can access Amie's program that she talked about and her many videos in case you want to learn, right? We will also be sharing with you how to access the different products offered by Fraser Math Solutions. So with that being said, I say thank you for joining us, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.